The waiter had just lit the candle on their table when I walked in. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing louder than I expected. For a second, I almost turned back. My hands were shaking, not from nerves but from the mix of fury and disbelief boiling inside me. My husband, Adam, the man who once held my hand in this same restaurant and promised me forever, was sitting there now, smiling across the table at another woman. I didn't come alone. The man beside me, Daniel, adjusted his watch and gave me a calm, tight smile. He was her husband. Yes, her husband. The woman my husband was having an affair with. When I found out, I thought I'd explode, but instead, I made a plan. A slow, quiet, patient plan. We walked straight to the hostess. I could see Adam's profile, his hand on her wine glass, his thumb gently tracing the rim. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who believed his lies were safe. I told the hostess, table for two, right next to that couple by the window. She smiled politely, unaware of the storm she'd just helped seat. As we sat down, Daniel looked at them, then at me. Are you sure about this? He whispered. I nodded, eyes fixed on Adam. He needs to see what betrayal looks like. A week ago, my world shattered. I was doing laundry when I found a hotel receipt in Adam's jacket pocket. I wasn't looking for trouble, but there it was, printed clearly, dated last Friday night, at a hotel 30 minutes from our home. I stared at that piece of paper for so long that the ink started to blur from my tears. When he came home that night, I didn't confront him. I just smiled, served dinner, and watched him lie through his teeth about how exhausting his business trip had been. I knew I couldn't trust my emotions. Rage makes you sloppy. I needed proof, and I needed control. So, I followed the trail quietly. His phone, his schedule, his excuses, everything lined up too neatly. He wasn't careful anymore because he thought I'd never suspect him. But I did. And when I finally saw her name on his phone, Sophia, my heart didn't break. It froze. Daniel found out a few days later, but not from me. I called him after piecing everything together. His voice cracked when I told him. Sophia, he whispered. No, that can't be right. But it was. I sent him screenshots, receipts, and photos I took myself when they thought no one was watching. He called back later that night and said, let's meet. We sat in his car outside their favorite restaurant, the same one Adam used to take me to for anniversaries. The irony hurt like hell. That night, we planned everything. He'd make the reservation in his name, and I'd walk in beside him, calm and collected. No yelling, no tears, just presence. The kind that burns without fire. Now, sitting across from Daniel, I could feel my pulse slowing. The waiter poured water, and I thanked him, pretending nothing was wrong. Adam still hadn't noticed me. He was too busy leaning in towards Sophia, whispering something that made her laugh, her hand brushing his across the table like it was some forbidden romance movie. But it wasn't forbidden anymore. It was exposed. Daniel cleared his throat loudly. Adam's head turned, his smile fading as his eyes landed on me. For a split second, confusion flickered. Then panic. His jaw clenched, and his body stiffened. Sophia turned too, her face draining of color. Evening, I said softly, sipping my water. Beautiful night for dinner, isn't it? You could have heard a pin drop. Adam stuttered, Clara, what are you doing here? I tilted my head. Oh, you know. Just craving the steak you always said tasted better here than at home. My tone was light, casual, but my eyes stayed locked on his. Didn't expect to see you, or her. Sophia's voice trembled. Clara, this isn't what you think. Daniel leaned forward. Really? Then please, enlighten us. His voice was sharp but steady. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what it is. Adam's hand dropped from the table. Daniel, listen, I can explain. Daniel laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Explain? You mean how long? Or how many lies deep? I sat back, letting them squirm. This wasn't about yelling or scenes. It was about watching the truth corner them with no way out. People think revenge means shouting, throwing things, breaking down. But sometimes, the most powerful revenge is silence, the kind that makes them unravel by themselves. Sophia stood up suddenly, fumbling for her purse. I need to leave. Daniel said quietly, you already left. You left when you thought I wouldn't find out. The waiter came back, confused. I smiled politely and said, "Actually, could we have the check, please? For both tables." He blinked, unsure, but nodded and left. I wanted that final sting. I would pay for their dinner. Not out of kindness, but closure. Let the last thing they share together be a meal paid for by the woman they betrayed. As the waiter walked away, Adam leaned in, whispering harshly, "You didn't have to do this in public." I smiled. "No, I didn't. But you didn't have to cheat in private either." Daniel stood first. "I'm done here," he said, voice low but firm. "Sophia, you'll hear from my lawyer." He looked at me and added, "You did good, Clara. Real good." Then he walked out, leaving her standing frozen beside Adam, who was now staring at his untouched glass of wine like it might explain something. When the waiter returned, I handed him my card. My fingers didn't shake this time. It was strange, how calm I felt. Like the storm had passed and left nothing but clarity behind. "Keep the change," I told him. Then I stood up, adjusted my dress, and looked straight at Adam one last time. "You chose her," I said quietly, "so now you can keep her." I turned and walked away. The next few days were quiet. Adam didn't come home that night, and I didn't wait for him. I packed his things neatly into boxes and left them on the porch. When he showed up the next morning, looking exhausted and unshaven, I didn't open the door. I just watched from the window as he stood there, staring at his own belongings like he couldn't believe they no longer belonged inside. He called. He texted. He begged. "It was a mistake," he said. "She meant nothing." But mistakes don't last months. They don't involve hotel receipts, secret phone calls, and lies whispered in candlelight. They're choices. And he made his. A week later, Sophia's husband filed for divorce. Adam moved into a small apartment near his office. The same office where rumors started spreading about the affair that everyone apparently suspected long before I did. His reputation cracked, piece by piece, as the truth traveled faster than he could contain it. One night, I got an email from him. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I didn't open it. Some words lose meaning once they're said too late. Months passed. My anger faded, replaced by something deeper, peace. I started going out again, visiting places I'd avoided because they reminded me of us. The restaurant, the park, even the small bookstore we used to go to on Sunday mornings. It hurt at first, but then it felt like reclaiming territory I'd abandoned to ghosts. I ran into Daniel once at a charity event downtown. He looked better, calmer, freer. He smiled when he saw me. "You ever regret doing it that way?" he asked. I thought for a moment. No. It was the only way they'd understand what they destroyed. He nodded slowly. "Same here. Sometimes silence screams louder than words." We talked for a while, about work, life, how both of us had started new chapters. No romance, no drama, just two people who survived the same storm and learned to breathe again. Later that night, I went home and sat by the window with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights. I thought about how easily love can turn into deception when you stop protecting it. And how revenge, when done with dignity, doesn't destroy you, it frees you. Adam tried reaching out a few more times, small attempts at sympathy, texts about how he'd lost everything, how Sophia had left him too. I didn't respond. You can't rebuild trust on the ashes of betrayal. And I wasn't going to be his comfort after he burned our life down. One evening, I received a letter, not from him, but from Sophia. Handwritten, trembling ink. She wrote that she'd lost everything too. Her marriage, her reputation, her peace. She said she couldn't sleep, that guilt was eating her alive. I read it once, folded it, and set it on fire over the sink. I didn't need her remorse to validate my healing. Revenge doesn't always have to end with destruction. Sometimes it ends with understanding who you are without the people who broke you. I didn't need to ruin Adam's life. He did that himself. I just needed him to see me one last time, in the place where his lies were most alive, and realize he couldn't hide anymore. That night at the restaurant wasn't chaos. It was closure. Every flicker of that candle on their table felt like a truth finally lighting up. He wanted secrecy, I gave him. Exposure. He wanted control, I took it back. Now, months later, I still go to that same restaurant, alone. Not because I miss him, but because I refuse to let a memory dictate where I belong. The waiter who served us that night recognized me once. "Good to see you again, ma'am," he said politely. "Good to be back," I replied. And I meant it. I learned that sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's walking away without losing yourself. It's knowing the person who betrayed you will replay that night in their mind over and over, realizing that moment was the exact one they lost everything that mattered. As I sit here tonight, candlelight flickering in front of me, I smile, not because I'm proud of what happened, but because I finally feel free. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's loyalty. I measure it by the peace I carry after the storm. So, to anyone listening who's been betrayed, who's been lied to, who's been made to question their own reality, remember this: you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is one silent dinner, one calm stare. One choice to walk away with grace. Because when they realize you were their best chapter, it'll already be too late for them to turn the page. The Perfect Wife, The Quiet Betrayal, captures the emotional foundation of Clara's story. She wasn't loud, reckless, or naive. She was the kind of woman who built her marriage with patience, loyalty, and quiet strength. She believed in trust, in small gestures that held love together. To everyone around her, she was the perfect wife, devoted, understanding, always holding the family steady. But perfection often blinds people to what's slipping beneath the surface. Adam took that calm devotion for granted. He mistook kindness for weakness, silence for ignorance. That's where the quiet betrayal began, not with the affair itself, but with every little lie he told, every time he looked her in the eye and said he loved her while loving someone else in secret. Clara's betrayal wasn't loud, it happened in whispers, in subtle changes of behavior she almost missed because she trusted too much. When she found the hotel receipt, it wasn't just evidence, it was a moment of awakening. The woman who had been steady, gentle, and forgiving suddenly saw how her silence had been used against her. Yet even then, she didn't lose her composure. She didn't shout, cry, or beg. The same quietness that was once mistaken for fragility became her weapon. Her revenge wasn't born from rage but from grace. She stayed the perfect wife on the outside, but inside, she transformed into something stronger. The quiet betrayal gave rise to quiet power. And when she finally sat across from Adam and his mistress at that restaurant, it wasn't chaos she brought, it was clarity. She didn't need to destroy him, he had already done that himself. All she had to do was let him see her strength in silence. The Perfect Wife, The Quiet Betrayal, isn't just about a woman deceived, it's about how calm, dignity, and patience can become the most devastating response to deceit. Clara didn't need to scream for revenge, her silence told the whole story. The reservation that changed everything was more than just a dinner booking, it was the moment everything in Clara's life shifted from confusion to clarity, from silence to strength. When she made that call to reserve a table, it wasn't about food or routine. It was the moment she decided she would no longer be the victim of her husband's lies. It was the beginning of her transformation. That single reservation was her quiet declaration of war. For weeks, she had lived in the fog of suspicion and heartbreak, watching the man she once trusted drift further into deception. The discovery of the hotel receipt wasn't just evidence of infidelity, it was proof that her marriage, the one she had nurtured with patience and love, had already ended behind her back. Still, she didn't explode. She didn't scream or throw things. She waited. Because she knew that the most devastating revenge isn't loud, it's perfectly timed. When Clara decided to make that reservation next to Adam's romantic dinner, she wasn't driven by rage anymore. It was something colder, sharper, resolve. She wanted him to see the consequences of his choices, not through arguments, but through presence. She wanted his lies to crumble in the same place where he thought he could keep them safe. The restaurant that once symbolized love would now become the stage for his downfall. She didn't walk into that restaurant as the betrayed wife. She walked in as someone who had already accepted the truth and reclaimed her power. Every step she took toward that table was a step away from the woman she used to be, the one who waited up late, believed excuses, and blamed herself for the growing distance. That reservation was her way of saying, I see you now. I know exactly who you are. The air in the restaurant that night was heavy with quiet tension. Adam didn't notice her at first, he was too comfortable in his illusion. But when Clara sat down beside Daniel, Sophia's husband, and their eyes met across the room, time seemed to stop. That was the moment the reservation fulfilled its purpose. No confrontation could have cut deeper than the sight of two betrayed spouses calmly sitting beside their partner's secret world. For Clara, that moment wasn't about revenge in the dramatic sense. It was about justice, the kind that doesn't need words. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene, she just existed in their space, unshaken, unbothered. Her silence screamed everything she didn't need to say, I know. And you can't hide anymore, The beauty of that reservation was how it flipped the power dynamic completely. Adam had built an entire fantasy where he controlled the lies, but that night, he lost control in an instant. His comfort shattered, his confidence drained, and the guilt he thought he could manage finally found him face to face. The same candlelight that once made his deceit look romantic now illuminated his humiliation. Clara paying for both tables was the final touch of poetic justice. It wasn't about generosity, it was symbolism. She was closing the chapter on her terms. By paying the bill, she wasn't covering their dinner, she was paying the last price of their betrayal and walking away debt-free, emotionally and morally. That gesture turned the dinner into a complete reversal. He thought he was having an affair in peace, but she turned it into a public confession without uttering a single accusation. That night, everything changed. The marriage that had been dying quietly finally ended with dignity, hers, not his. She walked out calm, composed, and free, while Adam was left sitting in the ruins of his double life. The reservation didn't just expose him, it freed her. Over the following weeks, that moment echoed in both their lives differently. For Adam, it was the beginning of loss, his home, his reputation, his self-image. For Clara, it was the start of healing. She didn't drown in bitterness or chase him for closure. She already had it. Her closure came the moment she saw his face crumble under the weight of his own choices. When she later reflected on it, Clara realized that the reservation symbolized everything she'd lost and everything she'd regained. It was the moment she took control back, not through anger, but through grace. She had turned what could have been a screaming match into a silent masterpiece of truth. That dinner wasn't just a confrontation, it was transformation. Even months later, when she revisited the restaurant, the memory no longer stung. The place that once witnessed her heartbreak had become a symbol of her strength. The waiter's polite greeting, "Good to see you again," felt like acknowledgement of the quiet power she carried. She didn't avoid the past anymore, she owned it. The reservation that changed everything is a story of how one deliberate act can redefine an entire life. It teaches that revenge doesn't always require destruction. Sometimes, it's a calm evening, a steady voice, and the courage to face deceit without fear. It's about how the smallest decisions, like booking a table, can become the loudest statements of self-worth. That night didn't just expose a liar, it revealed who Clara really was. The woman who used to shrink from confrontation became the woman who faced betrayal head-on with poise. The wife who was once ignored became unforgettable. In the end, the reservation changed everything because it wasn't about punishing Adam, it was about reclaiming herself. It turned pain into strength, betrayal into clarity, and silence into a weapon more powerful than any outburst could ever be. That's the kind of revenge that lingers, not because it destroys the other person, but because it restores the one who was broken. Clara didn't need a dramatic ending. She didn't need him to beg or cry. She only needed that moment of recognition, that flicker of realization in his eyes when he understood what he'd lost. And that's exactly what she got the night she made the reservation that changed everything. The dinner of deception wasn't just a meal, it was a mirror that revealed every lie, every secret, every hidden glance that had lived in the shadows of Clara and Adam's marriage. What looked like a romantic dinner between two lovers was, in truth, a feast of betrayal carefully plated beneath candlelight. It was supposed to be their little secret, but fate, or perhaps justice, had other plans. Adam believed he had mastered the art of deception. He had chosen the same restaurant where he used to take Clara for anniversaries, thinking the familiarity made it safer. That was his first mistake. The place carried too many memories, too much truth embedded in its walls. When Clara stepped inside that night, those memories returned, sharper than ever, but they no longer hurt. They gave her focus. Because this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about closure. Across the room, Adam was laughing softly, the kind of laugh Clara hadn't heard in months. The woman sitting across from him, Sophia, was smiling like she belonged there. They looked like two people in love, sharing inside jokes over wine and candlelight. But every laugh, every touch, every fake smile was another layer of deception laid bare under the restaurant's warm lights. Clara's arrival turned that dinner into something unforgettable. She didn't storm in or create chaos, she walked with quiet confidence, a kind of calm that can only come from pain refined into strength. She wasn't there to confront him with tears or anger. She was there to let the truth expose itself naturally. She'd reserved the table next to theirs, intentionally close enough that every whispered word between Adam and Sophia would die in their throats the moment they saw her. Daniel, Sophia's husband, sat beside Clara, calm, composed, but burning inside. Together, they didn't have to plan a speech. Their presence was enough. It was poetic, two betrayed souls sitting side by side, watching the performance of their partner's lies unravel. When Adam finally noticed her, the change on his face said everything. The color drained, the false charm vanished, and guilt took its place. He stammered, tried to justify, but words were useless. His lies had nowhere left to hide. The dinner that began as an act of love became an open courtroom, and his silence was the confession. Sophia tried to speak too, but her voice cracked under the weight of her choices. The woman who had once stolen someone else's husband suddenly realized how small her world had become in that single moment. She had built her happiness on someone else's pain, and now she was living her own punishment, right there in public, where no excuse could save her. The dinner of deception was now the dinner of truth. Every candle flicker seemed to mock them. Every glance from nearby tables felt like judgment. Adam tried to whisper to Clara, desperate for control. "You didn't have to do this here," he muttered. But Clara's calm reply cut deeper than a shout ever could. "You didn't have to do this anywhere." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Instead, she told the waiter to bring her the bill for both tables. That simple act flipped the narrative completely. The woman he betrayed was now the one paying for the meal he used to betray her. It was poetic justice served on fine china. When she handed the card to the waiter and said, "Keep the change," it wasn't about money, it was about reclaiming dignity. That dinner exposed not just infidelity, but the arrogance of thinking betrayal could remain hidden forever. Adam believed he was in control, that his lies were airtight, but deception has a way of eating through even the finest fabric of secrecy. That night, everything he had woven so carefully came undone, thread by thread. For Clara, that dinner marked the end of pretending. She no longer had to doubt her instincts or chase explanations. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and it freed her. Walking out of the restaurant, she didn't feel rage anymore. She felt weightless. Behind her, Adam sat frozen in shame, and Sophia stared down at her untouched glass, realizing that what they called love had just collapsed under the pressure of exposure. In the days that followed, the memory of that dinner replayed in everyone's mind. For Adam, it became the night everything he took for granted disappeared, his marriage, his image, his comfort. For Clara, it became the night she took her power back. The same woman he underestimated had outsmarted him without a single raised voice. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud, but the dinner of deception proved otherwise. True revenge doesn't need shouting. It lives in moments of quiet dignity, in the calm smile of someone who no longer needs validation. Clara didn't destroy Adam, she let him destroy himself, simply by making him face what he'd done. That dinner also revealed something else, how lies can feel intoxicating to those who tell them. Adam thought he was clever, that he could manage two lives at once. He dressed his deceit in charm, convinced himself it was harmless, temporary, maybe even justified. But when confronted with the truth, he saw the ugliness of what he'd become. The same confidence that once drew people in now looked pitiful. And as for Clara, that night didn't make her bitter, it made her stronger. She learned that revenge can be elegant, that walking away with composure can hurt more than any dramatic outburst. The woman who entered that restaurant was broken, the woman who left was reborn. The dinner meant to celebrate his secret love ended up celebrating her liberation. Months later, when she walked past that same restaurant again, she smiled. Not because she missed him, but because she no longer did. The memory of that dinner didn't sting anymore, it empowered her. The deception that once shattered her now stood as proof of how much she could endure and still rise. The dinner of deception became the final chapter of their story, not through confrontation but revelation. It taught Clara that truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. Sometimes, it's simply shown, quietly, elegantly, devastatingly. That one dinner didn't just expose a lie. It ended an illusion. And in doing so, it set her free. The trap unfolds, wasn't planned with vengeance in mind, it was born out of clarity. Clara didn't wake up one morning and decide to humiliate her husband. The idea grew slowly, like a shadow stretching longer every day she saw his behavior change. The distance in his eyes, the late-night phone calls, the hollow explanations, she absorbed them all in silence until silence itself became her strength. When she reserved that table next to his secret dinner, she wasn't seeking chaos, she was setting the stage for truth to reveal itself. The trap didn't need violence or shouting. It only needed presence. That evening, everything looked deceptively peaceful. The restaurant buzzed softly with laughter, cutlery, and music. Candlelight shimmered across glasses of wine. Adam sat by the window, confident in his deception, his hand grazing Sophia's fingers like a man in love. He thought the world belonged to him in that moment. Every detail, the wine, the charm, the lies, was part of a world he had crafted for himself, away from the woman who had once been his anchor. And that's what made the trap so perfect. He didn't even see it forming. Clara and Daniel entered quietly, no anger, no theatrics. Just two betrayed souls walking toward closure. She asked the hostess for a table, right next to that lovely couple by the window. Her voice was calm, steady. The kind of calm that makes people underestimate you. Within minutes, the pieces were in place, and the trap began to breathe on its own. From their table, Clara could see everything, the way Adam leaned closer when he spoke, the way Sophia tucked her hair behind her ear, pretending to be shy and innocent. The irony was sharp, this was the same restaurant where Adam had once told Clara she was his everything. Now, he said those same words to someone else. But the universe has a strange sense of timing. Because in that same place, he was about to lose everything for good. Daniel watched quietly beside Clara, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. He didn't need to say much. They both knew this was the only way their spouses would understand the damage they'd done. The waiter poured them water, oblivious to the tension sitting at that table. To everyone else, they looked like two friends out for dinner. But across the room, their presence was an earthquake waiting to happen. The trap didn't unfold with loudness, it unraveled with silence. Adam noticed them only after Daniel cleared his throat, intentionally loud enough to pierce through the laughter at his table. Adam looked up, smiling at first, then froze. His smile cracked like glass. His face went pale, his body stiffened. He blinked, as if his eyes were lying to him. But they weren't. Clara was sitting right there, elegant, composed, staring back at him with eyes that held no anger, just understanding. The kind of understanding that leaves no room for excuses. Sophia turned around next, her laughter dying mid-sentence. The color drained from her face. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The air thickened. Every second stretched. No one in that restaurant understood what was happening, but they could feel the tension, a ripple of something heavy and irreversible. Clara smiled faintly. Beautiful night for dinner, isn't it? Her voice was soft, polite, devastating. She didn't need to accuse. The situation itself was the accusation. Adam stammered, searching for words. Clara, this isn't what it looks like, she finished for him, gently. You're right. It's worse. The silence that followed was the sound of the trap closing. Every lie he had told, every excuse he'd rehearsed, none of it mattered now. There was no way out. The truth had cornered him completely, right there in public, surrounded by strangers and the woman he'd betrayed. Daniel spoke next, his tone steady but sharp. You know, Sophia, I used to think I'd never be capable of hurting you. Turns out, I don't have to. You're doing it yourself. His words cut like a blade, clean, controlled, final. Sophia's lip trembled. Daniel, please, no, he interrupted. Save it. You've already said enough to him. He nodded toward Adam. Clara watched quietly. The pain that once burned inside her had turned cold, refined. She wasn't here to break down. She was here to end things. When the waiter arrived again, she smiled politely and said, "Can I have the check for both tables, please?" The young man hesitated, clearly confused, but nodded and left. That was her finishing touch, elegant, precise, unforgettable. Adam's voice dropped to a whisper, desperate now. You didn't have to do this here. Clara met his eyes. You didn't have to do this anywhere. That was it. The moment he realized the trap hadn't been a setup at all. It was simply the truth waiting to be revealed, and he walked into it himself. When she stood up, she felt lighter than she had in months. She didn't look back. Daniel followed a few seconds later, leaving Adam and Sophia sitting in the wreckage of their own choices. The restaurant went silent for a while after they left. People didn't know what they'd witnessed, but they could feel its weight. Outside, the night air felt clean, cool, freeing. Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "You did good." Clara smiled faintly. "No. They did this to themselves." Over the next few days, the aftermath unfolded exactly as expected. Adam tried to reach her, first with apologies, then with guilt. He said it was a mistake, that he didn't mean to hurt her. But she knew better. Mistakes happen once, choices happen over and over again. His affair wasn't a mistake, it was a decision he made every day until he got caught. Sophia's marriage collapsed too. Daniel filed for divorce, calm and firm. No shouting, no revenge, just distance. That's how the trap worked best. It didn't explode, it echoed. The memory of that dinner would live in both their minds longer than any punishment could. For Clara, the night of the trap became the start of something new. She didn't feel victorious, she felt free. Revenge wasn't about watching him suffer, it was about no longer letting his betrayal define her. She had seen the truth, faced it, and walked away with grace. That was her triumph. Months later, she returned to the same restaurant. This time, she came alone. The waiter recognized her but didn't mention that night. He just smiled and said, "Good to see you again." She nodded, sat by the window, the same one where Adam had once sat, and ordered her favorite meal. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about reclaiming the space that used to belong to her pain. The Trap Unfolds wasn't about revenge in the usual sense. It was about exposing deception with quiet strength. It showed that the most powerful traps aren't built with anger, they're built with truth. And when truth finally shows itself, no one escapes unharmed. Adam thought he was clever, untouchable, living two lives without consequence. But when the trap unfolded, he realized too late that he wasn't the hunter, he was the caught. That night didn't destroy Clara. It freed her. And that's the difference between revenge that consumes you and revenge that restores you. She didn't lose herself trying to punish him. She simply gave him what he'd been hiding from, the truth. And when the truth came for him, it came dressed in silence, dignity, and a calm smile across the next table.